Welcome to Truth Telling with Elizabeth D'Alto, the podcast dedicated to focusing on the truth that is always evolving within us and around us, where we explore the potentiality of truth as a highly esteemed value at a time in history when most people have more on their plates than any one human should. If you're new to me, full expression is my jam. Some words people have used to describe me range from speaker, trainer, coach, healer, writer, spiritual advisor, teacher, podcaster, and someone even called me their soul Sherpa once. I'm less concerned with titles or labels and more interested in results, change, and creating a world we want to, can, and are proud to live in. A kinder, gentler, more curious, collaborative, reverent world where people respect each other's backgrounds, experiences, and truths. They trust in themselves, in life, and recognize that we need each other. And they know how to cultivate healthy relationships to true power, not the very unhealthy kind of power our current culture is predicated upon. Speaking of our culture, there's a lot of noise and ignorance in our current culture, and this show aims to cut through that by exploring the truths of a diverse range of incredible voices. From authors, artists, creatives, and educators to activists, speakers, and those in various scientific and esoteric fields, our guests hail from cultures and countries all over the world. We post a new interview every Monday, and if you want to keep up with the show notes and quotes from our guests, you can follow me on Instagram at Elizabeth D'Alto. You can expect a wide range of topics when you tune into this show. Everything from health, communication, money, success, parenting, desire, sex, love, and spirituality, to making pivots and transitions in life, and topics related to psychology, storytelling, gender and race issues, emotional intelligence, activism, advocacy, and much more. A few disclaimers. No episode of the show is meant for everyone, and every episode is meant for whoever needs it on the right day at the right time. Not all guest views will reflect my own, and that's intentional. We don't learn, grow, heal, or improve by staying in our comfortable bubbles with all of our people who look, think, or live exactly how we do. If you love what you hear and find it useful and inspiring, the best way to show your appreciation is to share the episode, subscribe to the show, and leave us a rating and review wherever you listen in from. Thank you so much for being here with me. Here we go. This is episode number 296 of Truth Telling with Elizabeth D'Alto. I met today's guest at a conference in 2018 about decentering whiteness in yoga and mindfulness spaces. She was a keynote speaker, and hearing her story and experience not only moved me, but really helped me to anchor in so much of what we've been learning and exploring about racism, oppression, and liberation here on the show over the last 2 years. So I was pumped when she agreed to come on the show. Cassandra Johnson is a social justice activist, anti-racism trainer, author, and yoga teacher. Her big truth was around needing to shed layers and let go to create space for different opportunities and energies. In this conversation, we talked specifically about creating liberatory spaces, decreasing suffering, and doing things differently in Western yoga environments. She walked us through how justice is possible if we really live into the principles of yoga. She shared her perspective on oneness, holding things at the same time, why she prefers to say safer space rather than safe space, and the kinds of microaggressions that are common for Black people in yoga classes. We also talked about her book, Skill in Action, how she's delivering her work in the world currently, and how repair actually happens. This is a really thorough, really juicy chat. Enjoy this one, share it up, especially with your yoga friends or your health and wellness friends. This has been a recurring theme on the podcast. We've had a couple of conversations like this over the course of the last several weeks because it's very, very important to those who care about the topics we talk about here and also participate in these kinds of spaces. We can't really have one without the other anymore, y'all. So find me on Instagram. Let me know what you thought. Tag me. Talk to your people about it. The show notes for this episode are at untameyourself.com/296. And if you're not yet on our podcast notification list where we send you the weekly emails with the show notes, links to resources, and all kinds of things that we mentioned during the episode for your convenience, get on that list over at wildsoulmovement.com/podcast. And now for the show. Michelle, this has been months in the making. I'm so happy to have you here.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So one of the things going into 2019, on the show. This is like the digital version of not writing the wrong date on the thing anymore, since nobody is like writing on paper like in school. 2019 that I really want to make sure we incorporate more into our interviews and conversations is a really integral part of my work, which is embodiment. So the first thing I actually want to ask you is, how's your body today?
My body's feeling pretty good today. I went on a run yesterday after a long period of time away from running, and so I'm a little sore, but that's good. It's like, oh, I like moved my body, which was nice.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Thank you. And then the other thing I always like to ask people to start out is, what is a truth that's having a big impact on your life right now?
This truth keeps coming up in my spiritual practice, and it's not new, but it feels like something is about to happen. The truth around the need to shed layers and let go, so that other energy and opportunities can enter into my experience and world. It feels like my spiritual practice and the cards I pull every morning are all about death or letting go or some transformation. So something's about to happen. And I knew I wasn't done with transformation or loss or letting go. And I'm preparing for it to happen again, whatever it is. And it may not be something that's negative. I've just had a lot of loss over the last year. So it's interesting for it to show up, such a strong theme at the beginning of 2019.
You know what I love about this? I am a geek for synchronicity, and I'm right there with you, literally. I've had so much like loss and let go of so much the last 2 years. And then right before like this, at the time of recording this, it's January 8th, and we just had that new moon solar eclipse in Capricorn. And I like the whole weekend like worked me. It was just showing me like, this needs to go, this needs to be structured, this needs to be reoriented. And I was kind of like, okay, but really?
I know. I know. I'm like, okay, here we go.
And then the other cool, maybe divinely timed thing is in my program that I just started, Power 2019, our first topic is surrender and release. And the first mantra is, it is safe for me to let go of what no longer serves me. And I literally like made that video and posted it yesterday.
Wow. Well.
And here we are.
I know.
So I wonder if everyone listening, I'm not sure, I don't have the calendar in front of me when this will actually go up. I don't think it'll be till February, but I'm so curious for people listening. Find us on Instagram and in the DMs and let us know maybe what you're letting go of right now too, if this is what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So I loved, for those of you listening, I met Michelle at an event back in October about decentering whiteness in yoga and mindfulness spaces. And for people listening, you know I don't always ask people like the general sweeping, tell us your story. But Michelle, your story was actually so important because it was one of those, hearing your lived experience, which was so different from mine in like a yoga space, was really invaluable to actually that whole event for me. So I'd love whatever pieces of it you want to share. What drew you to yoga? What was that experience like for you? And then how has it kind of evolved to what you do now?
Yeah, I practiced yoga, although I didn't really know it was yoga. And I had a Jane Fonda like video in high school, and I don't know where it came from because no one else in my family practiced asana or embodied practices. And then when I went to college, I practiced yoga in a gym class, but I didn't experience it as a spiritual practice. Mm-hmm. And I don't really know if the teacher called it yoga. Now I know that's what we were doing, the physical part of yoga. But I really started to commit to my practice when I moved to North Carolina in 1996. And I was in grad school for social work. And so I started to practice yoga, again, the physical practice, but this teacher opened my eyes to understanding the spiritual part of yoga. And then I started practicing every day with different teachers. And I think what made me show up and like continue to show up to the mat or the cushion was the transformation that I felt in my body and heart and spirit. And I was in school for social work, graduated a school social worker, and also became an anti-racism trainer. in my early 20s. And so I was having this experience in yoga classes where we'd be invited into liberation. And I was pretty clear the world was not structured or set up for me to be free.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was like a very, it made me curious. Sometimes it was painful. It just brought up a lot of questions about liberatory spaces, because I believe the practice of yoga is about liberation and decreasing our suffering, and doing that for the collective. And I like continued to go into spaces where I didn't see myself reflected in the classroom. The teacher didn't look like me. The class really didn't look like me. And that theme continued. I've been a yoga teacher for 10 years now. And that theme has continued. And it's also made me create spaces just for people of color at times to practice yoga, because it's a mind trip to feel free in a moment in the breath on the mat, and then to walk out of the classroom, or to be in the classroom and for someone to say something that is oppressive or harmful, or the very space, like the structure, the building where I'm practicing, feeling oppressive. So it's I've continued to be really curious about it and the discomfort that arises when we're invited into freedom, but yet we can't forget the world isn't set up for everyone to be free.
1,000%. And this is actually, through the podcast largely, has been an enormous unpacking and learning curve for me the last couple of years in my own space, because a lot of my work is liberatory in nature. Like, we're deprogramming and deconditioning cultural programming and stuff. But at first it was just focused on reclaiming and redefining womanhood. And it just like hit me, like, I can't talk about womanhood if I'm not going to look at everything that impacts our womanhood.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So I'd love to know, in your classes and in your dedicated spaces, what do you do differently? What do you say differently? How is the dialogue different that makes it, I guess, for lack of a better term, more inclusive?
Yeah, since I was an anti-racism trainer before I became a yoga teacher, activism and anti-racism and anti-oppression work, or liberatory work, informed how I experienced yoga teacher training,
Mm-hmm.
and then every experience that I've had with yoga. And so I tend to talk about, and the book is all about social justice and yoga and the intersection and how they're actually the same, right?
Yeah.
We can create justice through this. If we live into the principles of yoga, we will create justice. And the book invites people into the idea of oneness, which I believe in, and the reality that we're not living as one. Yeah. Right. And so I talk about those things in classes and trainings. And then in my class, I teach a class for women of color in Winston-Salem every week. And we talk about race, and we talk about the space that we're creating. It's not, I can't guarantee safety for people.
Right.
It is a safer place because people are not having to manage or respond to microaggressions or like, I reflect them, I look like them. And I think that just makes people feel more included, right? And safe in the space. But I was teaching yoga nidra, which is like deep relaxation. I was teaching that to this class for women of color. And I had a moment, they looked so peaceful and relaxed. And I had a moment of just knowing that there was that deep relaxation and that they were going to get up and go out into the world. And I was like, what am I doing right now? Because I want to invite people into this, in particular people who are oppressed based on their identities. And I'm creating something that is it's not reflective of how the world's going to treat them when they walk out the door. Totally. And so we talk about things like that.
Yeah. As you're saying that, I literally just had like this flash of a moment many years ago. It was probably like 2010, I think. The first time I ever took a pole dancing class, I was in New York City at this place called S Factor. And it was 90 minutes. And at the end of the experience, I felt so amazing, so in my body, like so sensual and sexy, but for myself, not for performance, not for anyone's approval. And it was this just deep, this real love and intimacy with myself. An appreciation I had not experienced ever before in any other place for my body. Mm. And then I walked out, and literally, I want to say within 2 minutes, being on 23rd Street in Manhattan, some man says some shitty, irritating, hitting on me kind of thing, aggressive thing. And I'm like, well, back to reality.
Right? Yeah.
And for me, even just recognizing like my own privilege in that, I wasn't in danger. It's oppressive, but it wasn't like, I think this is, as I'm saying it out loud, I'm going, look at me justifying this bullshit that happens all the time, being like, it wasn't that big of a deal. It happens all the time. But it is like that experience. I feel like my heart is in constant like grief and gratitude for like the beautiful things we get to create and the spaces we get to hold, but then, how life is actually going to be for people.
Right. And yes. And I think part of what I invite people into and the yoga community into is to acknowledge that. Like, we can't escape from the grief and the suffering and the trauma that's created in the culture based on how it was constructed. And we're responding, we're like dealing with that with people's bodies. When they walk into the room, they're embodying that grief. And so I feel like we are doing a disservice when we don't acknowledge it in the space. And we pretend it's like this artificial space where
love and light.
You've escaped everything that's going on outside of this room. That's not real. Like, that's not life.
Yeah. And what was the impact on you when the space was held that way in all those experiences you had?
I felt very frustrated. And sometimes I felt anger, and, I really noticed it when George Zimmerman was acquitted, because that was a moment for me where it felt like all the ancestral trauma came up. Like, it was everything cracked open. I was not sure. Like, I didn't feel grounded. I didn't feel safe. I had PTSD. And of course, I've been Black for 43 years. Like, I knew that experience, but something happened in that moment. And then things continued to happen and continue to happen now, with police brutality and just an unjust system. And when I don't expect teachers or spiritual practitioners to talk about George Zimmerman being acquitted or the election of Trump. Like, I feel like there are spaces to do that in. But I did expect teachers to recognize the tenderness that people move with.
Yeah.
Whatever that looks like. It might just be talking about tenderness, right? Without actually saying, because we're also impacting people's nervous systems when we're teaching and disrupting in a way. And so I'm mindful of how much I say. But like, talk about, aren't most of us feeling tender about what's going on in the world? Talk about that.
Yeah.
Talk about grief,
Yeah.
Talk about loss, talk about beauty and how brutal the world can feel.
Yeah. This is, again, another really, even on the show, just acknowledging, like, we have a variety of guests. And if I were to only limit the guests to people who were completely informed about all these things, I wouldn't have a show anymore.
Right.
I'd be able to interview like a handful of people over and over again, because everyone's a work in progress. But, sometimes someone will say something and it like crunches on me and I'm like, oh, all right, pause. Like, we just need to acknowledge, like, we're having a very privileged conversation, or it's very heteronormative, or it's very like, you know what I mean? Like, we're working these things out of our system, but it's still here. And I know some of you are not, this isn't going to relate, or, but I know you're there, like, I think just the acknowledgement and sometimes I feel like I overdo it, but I'd way rather overdo it than leave people out anymore, which I did for a very long time.
Yeah. I don't think we can overdo it, because part of what the culture in my experience has done is conditioned me to not like tell the truth about what I'm experiencing, and instead to doubt myself.
Yeah.
And if I racialize it, like to doubt that racism's happening, right? When I actually know racism's happening, right? And it's going to happen when I walk out of my house later today, right? It happens all the time, and sexism is going to happen, and ableism is going to happen, right? And so I don't know if we can overdo it, if we can overdo the truth telling, because for a long time, I feel like the culture has conditioned many of us to lie and not see.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. I want to come back. Oneness. I want to hear how you feel about oneness, how you approach, how you address. When you said, I believe in oneness, but we're not experiencing it, that really struck me.
Yeah, I think oneness and connection, and that's the heart of yoga and spiritual practice. That oneness is an absolute truth, and so it's important for me to recognize the way in which I'm connected to everyone and our humanity, our shared humanity. It's also important for me to know that we're moving in very different ways based on our identities and how the culture and dominant culture responds to our identities.
Yeah.
So and I can hold both of those at the same time. Like I can see the shared humanity, even with people who disagree with everything I say or who are overtly racist, right? I can see this is culture. This is culture's conditioned this person to be reacting in this way right now to me, to the situation. Like I can do that. And that's a practice of me seeing our oneness actually in our connection. And also something's deeply problematic about the racist thing the person just said, right? I can do both. And I think that's a practice. And I feel like so many spiritual spaces can lean into that practice more. Instead of leaning on we're oneness and that's enough. Because saying we're one is different than creating conditions that will allow us to live as one.
Okay. Saying we're one is different than creating conditions that will actually allow us to live as one. Everyone, pause the interview, write it down.
That was deep. You're right. That was deep.
Well, we pull quotes out. We'll pull that out. We'll meme you. We'll send it to you. Spread it far. That's it. That's the distinction. And I appreciate, we talk about paradox a lot on the show. We talk about having to hold more than one thing. And I remember a couple years ago, the first time I said, we can hold more than one emotion at a time. I can feel rage and joy at the same time. That was mind blowing for people. I got so many messages. People shared that. And so you're saying the same thing in a different context. I can hold knowing that we are connected and that what that person just said was a really big problem.
Right.
One doesn't discount or excuse the other.
Yes, that's right. And I think the yoga community has leaned on oneness, particularly in this country, because of who represents yoga here, right? And I can be specific. In my experience, most of my teachers have been white, and most of the people in the room practicing have been white. Yeah. And most of the people on the cover of Yoga Journal are white. It's that's what I've been fed about who practices yoga. And that whiteness is so different than the experience of being in my body and moving in the world. So I get how the yoga community has leaned on oneness, because that's the experience people have been having, or they think they've been having.
Yes, right? Yes.
I understand where it comes from, and I absolutely believe that something needs to shift.
Yeah. And it's a beautiful concept. When you tap into it, especially in contrast to what we're experiencing now worldwide, it's hell yeah. Who wouldn't want that? Who wouldn't want to check out or into or tap into that when given the opportunity? But then you're saying, you come out in the world and that's not the experience we're having. You use the term microaggressions. We've had people talk about it on the show before, but I don't think, especially in terms of something we can't overdo, I don't think we can over-understand microaggressions. So I'm curious, especially in the context of this conversation as a yoga teacher and as a yoga student, can you give some examples of those that you've experienced inside the class or the community?
Yeah. And I want to say, I actually think micro, all of it's macro, right? It comes from a bigger space. And so I might name something that feels like a microaggression to me and deeply a macroaggression, or so oppressive for someone else. So I just want to name that. Cool. And I'll name it based on race and gender. So based on race, I've had the experience, and I said most of my yoga teachers have been white, and students practicing with me or me in classes with white teachers, those classes have mostly been white. Sometimes there's been an assumption that I have never practiced yoga when I walk in, and I know that's racialized because they haven't asked me. It's more of a set your mat up behind this person so you can know what to do. That's happened multiple times. And that happens to women of color, I feel a lot, because I've heard it from other women of color. And the assumption that I'm not a teacher or the teacher, because I've like worked in spaces where I've checked in people at the front desk, and then I walk into the classroom up to the front and I can see there's a disconnect because so many people have never had a Black teacher, right? And really, like, so many people have not had a Black yoga teacher or spiritual leader.
I'm doing a scan right now, and I'm pretty positive I've never had a Black yoga teacher. I did a module of a yoga teacher training, and there was one Black man in there, but that was it.
Yeah, so those are two that I notice happen all the time, like consistently. Oh, that's the teacher, or she does know how to practice yoga. And you know what, or the physical part of yoga, what happens for me is because of internalized oppression, when there's an assumption that I don't know how to do a handstand, which I don't even care about handstands, then I'm going to push myself to do it.
Yeah.
Because I'm like one of a few people of color, if not the only one. The teachers made the assumption that I don't know how to practice and that I need and I do need support. And then it makes me push myself in ways that are totally connected to internalizing that I'm not good enough to be in this space because the space has told me that because it's made an assumption about me.
And so I'm curious, have you ever injured yourself or like, I feel like that could go far. That could play itself out really badly.
Yes. I haven't injured myself. I mean, I have pushed myself and I recognize, like I witnessed myself doing something that I don't even care about doing, right? That I could modify.
Yes, totally. You know? Like handstands.
Who cares? Yeah, who cares? So I don't push myself to the point of injury, but there is injury and harm happening.
Physical, non-physical, right? Yeah.
Yeah, me being in my head, like witnessing this experience, watching other people, are they making assumptions about me? That's not what the practice of yoga is about.
No. Yeah, actually, when you were saying that, that's what I was thinking. I'm like, I wonder how long it takes you to get into your own experience, on either end, when you're the teacher or when you're the student, when that's how it starts.
Yeah, I feel like when I'm the student, it's not, and an assumption has been made about my practice. It's very hard for me to ground and center in the space because it doesn't feel like a safer space or safe enough space then.
Yeah, yeah. And this is cool because I know we have health and wellness, we have spiritual teachers, we have yoga teachers listening who might be feeling some shame or embarrassment or, I didn't know what I didn't know as they're listening and maybe realizing that they've done that and they've made these assumptions. What would you say to those people right now?
Well, I'm not one to shame people. Right. And so I offered those examples as education information for people. And shame isn't going to be useful to me in this. So if people respond with that, like that's not actually going to help the next person of color student who walks into the space.
Right.
And hopefully what I said will allow people to think about it in a different way. It's just an offering around perspective.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah. And the other way, and I actually think these are macro, they're not micro. Gender comes up assumptions about gender identity, that comes up all the time in yoga spaces. And the way I've experienced it is teachers saying, we're all women in here. Like that, I've heard that countless, it happens a lot. And I notice it every time. And I am a woman, identify that way, but I'm very aware that I don't know how other people identify. And that's where it doesn't feel like a microaggression. That feels very oppressive to me. And it happens a lot. So that's the other way I've noticed it, like oppression happening in the classroom. Yeah.
I certainly did that for years. I say, women or women identifying people. What do you say?
I don't actually, when I'm teaching, I don't say women or men. I tend to stay away from that.
Yeah.
Because I don't know. I have no idea how people identify unless they've told me or I know, know them or have a relationship with them. So I tend not to say anything about that and just cue if I'm teaching a physical practice. And then if I'm teaching my yoga teacher training and lecturing, usually people are sharing their pronouns from the beginning. And we've set up some guidelines around assumptions and how we want to respond when harm happens, because it's going to happen, because no space is safe. And so I don't know if I say women or men or I do say female identified or woman identified. But I think I tend to stay away.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
from it, 'cause I don't know.
My work is woman centric. So sometimes when I'm saying it, it's because I know like there wouldn't be someone who is male or identifying as male in the space. But either way, thank you for that. Was it you? I love your Instagram. Can you tell them your Instagram? I know you have two. Which is the one you prefer people follow you on?
Either's fine. Skill and Action. That's the name of the book. That's more the one I post yoga stuff on, or like stuff going on in the world. But I also do that on Mystic Cassandra. Cassandra's my middle name. Mm-hmm. So Mystic Cassandra is the other one. And I post lots of pictures of my dog Jasper on that.
The hot tub.
The mountains. Yeah, the hot tub.
The card spreads. I love it. I love it all so much. Can you, it's a tangent, but I loved it so much when you shared it at the event where we met. Can you talk about why you use your full name and you don't leave out the Cassandra?
Yes. So Cassandra is my middle name, and I didn't really connect with that growing up. And then I was in my early 20s, and a professor at UNC looked at my resume, and he saw Cassandra, and he asked me if I knew about the mythology around Cassandra, and I said no. And he told me that in Greek mythology, she was a truth teller, and she was cursed, so people couldn't hear her. And then I lived in Portland last year, and I was getting ready to move there. And my friend Asa, who studies Greek mythology, he gave me a book about Cassandra, and he said they could hear her. They just didn't want to hear what she was saying, which is so very different than not being heard, right? Being able to be heard is different than like people being like, I actually don't want to hear that. I'm not ready for it. Like it's this truth that it means I have to face something in myself.
Yeah.
So I like totally claim that part of myself. And some people call me Cassandra instead of Michelle. My mom is very attached to Michelle, that name. So she calls me Michelle. But I'm like loving Cassandra because it feels like when the professor said, she was a truth teller and people couldn't hear her, it made me think about every space I'd interacted with where I wasn't heard or valued, right, or seen. And then the twist on it of like they could hear her, they just didn't want to hear it. And that was like my book came out after that, so I was birthing this thing. Mm-hmm. And people heard it and it's resonated. So it's been interesting to think about the energy of her and my experience with the book.
There are not a lot of books like yours out there. I feel like there's a lot of people who write books in like spiritual yoga mindfulness spaces where it's like, all right, well, here's another one for the pile of billions. But yours is not going in a pile of billions. How did that feel? And so I want to talk more about the book specifically, but I want to know how what was that experience like for you of being like, I'm going to say the things?
It didn't take me long to write the book because I think it's a truth that like was inside of me forever and needed to come out. And so there was ease with it when I started to write. And there was some vulnerability because the book is like story and an anti-racism analysis and yoga principles and how do we create more inclusive spaces. So I weave in and out with my story and then like, here are practical things you can do. And here are some practices around meditation and difference. But the vulnerability that feels deeper than the words is that I'm writing about white supremacy. Mm-hmm. Like my book is about oppression and white supremacy and how the spiritual community has perpetuated oppression.
Yeah.
And really like urges people to do better. And being a Black woman, even saying white supremacy, feels vulnerable. And then going to spaces, because I did a book tour to get back across the country from Portland to North Carolina, has felt very vulnerable. And just teaching workshops because I don't know who's in the space.
Right.
And I don't know who's going to walk into the space. And I feel like the culture is, things feel very out of control. Mm-hmm. And so that has felt, I think what has happened for me is that this is my work and I'm going to do it anyway. Yeah. Like I'm going to continue to do it because it's my dharma, it's my duty, it's my work in the world. And sometimes people don't perceive that I have fear about it because I'm like confident about it. And it's just, this is what it is. And I'm afraid every time I go do a book reading.
Yeah.
because I have no idea who's triggered by that and, what could happen in response to me telling the truth. And I'm still going to tell my truth.
Yeah.
But it's not easy.
Totally. Have you had anything, I guess I want to ask, by the way, let me say this first. If the answer to this question is going to be traumatizing or re-traumatizing, pass. Hard.
Okay.
I think you probably would anyway, but
Yes.
I'm just saying, please don't feel like you have to. Has anything scary happened at any of the events?
Nothing scary. No.
Cool.
No. And I feel very, I pray. I call in my grandmother. I feel very held as I do the work. And I know that won't prevent something from happening, but I feel held. I feel like I'm doing my ancestors' work. So
yeah.
It's not me. It's not just me.
Yeah.
And that helps me feel grounded.
Yeah, totally. What have been some of your favorite experiences you had? I do a lot of workshops and stuff too, so I know there's so many things happen, but there's always just some things that you're like, I will never forget. It was career defining or just cracked my heart open, anything like that from your book tour?
Yeah, I went to Denver, and the Black Women's Alliance invited me to speak and do a reading. And so it wasn't a workshop, and we didn't move through asana or physical practice. We practiced meditation. And this was, I think, the first event that they opened up to anyone. So many different women came to the space, some men came to the space. And I was reading from my book, and I looked up and saw, it was predominantly Black women though. And I saw 30 Black women, and I was reading about my grandmother and my great grandmother. And I just had this moment of complete flow and alignment. I am doing what I'm meant to do. That was what I received in that moment. And it is being reflected back to me by who is in this space and the way they're showing up in this space.
Yeah.
And I won't forget that. It felt very, it did feel career defining. This is my work.
I'm on the right path.
Yeah.
It's cool. I'm also really curious about, it might depend on the space and the talent and the audience, but I published a book in 2015, and I feel like I have a lot of friends who are authors and content creators, and there's always the part of the book that you think is going to be the most important, or that's really going to hit people, and then there's the part that really everyone gravitates towards. What was that in yours? Or maybe you didn't have that experience. Let me not put that on you that you had to have had that experience. I'm curious you have, and if you did, what was it?
I did. I had, maybe it was my story, because the book starts with my birth story. And I think that I couldn't have written this book without including my birth story, because I came to yoga by way of the breath and I couldn't breathe when I was born. So I think I knew that was impactful, but I don't think I understood how impactful that would be. And actually for me, because I didn't know my birth story, I learned it 4 years. I knew parts of it, but I learned about it, all of the things 4 years ago or 3 years ago. And then I'm writing this book, and then I'm remembering oh, you have a cellular, lived experience of coming into a world and not being able to breathe in a context where the breath is being extinguished because of oppression. And so that just felt deep to me. And the other thing that happened with this is, I am a truth teller, but so many people at workshops would say, thank you for telling the truth. And I don't assume my truth is the universal truth.
Right.
But that's people said that more to me than anything else. That's the feedback I got. Thank you so much for telling the truth. And that let me know this is a truth that hasn't been spoken as much as it needs to be in yoga communities or spiritual communities.
Yeah.
So those were my experiences with it.
So I'm curious, would you more recommend for people of color or other marginalized groups as well to go into existing spaces, create their own spaces? What's the... I'm not finding the end to that question, but do you get it? What are you really encouraging? Like, because the safe space thing, all right, maybe this is really the question I want to ask. Safe space is such a like, it's not that it's vague. I think it's a specific term, but doesn't usually mean what people want it to mean.
Right. Yeah, and I don't believe in it.
Right.
I've used safer space in this interview. Like, I believe in trying to create conditions that allow for safer space than the dominant culture creates.
Yes.
With an awareness that I cause harm because I have identities and embody identities that are seen as normal and supported by dominant culture. And I embody identities that are oppressed by dominant culture. And so the book is not there is a part about inclusivity and how the yoga community has been structured in this country to exclude people based on many identities, right? But it's not about creating a safe space because I can't guarantee safety.
Right.
And if I believe I can, I'm probably going to cause a lot of harm.
Right.
If I believe I'm going to create safe, that I know what safety looks like for everyone, I'm creating harm in that moment.
Yeah. This point that you just made, if I believe that I know what safety looks like for everyone. So I've had a conversation over the last few months with a few different people around like this concept of safe spaces. And, you know, some people are of the mindset that for white people, there's no such thing as an unsafe space. Do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, I don't believe that. I think, and yet I think I know where that comes from.
Yeah.
Because if it's racialized, and if I speak from my experience as a Black person, the country was never set up for me to be safe.
Right.
And it was set up for whiteness and white people to be safe.
Yes.
And that to be the measure for what's normal and who's normal, right? And who's free and who deserves to be free and who deserves to suffer. Mm-hmm. So I understand. And yet I don't think any of us are, I don't think the world is safe. I don't think the culture is safe.
Right.
And I think and that's just from that's probably my spiritual practice and my spiritual beliefs and also just who I am. And it makes me very curious about the need to say that like all spaces or that's not the way you said it. You said like
there's no unsafe space for white people.
It makes me wonder about the purpose of that. Like, how does that serve the collective for us to be in that space? Mm-hmm. And that's not a judgment. I actually am like that.
I'm with you. Curious. I'm asking because I've like I continue. I'm in this inquiry, right? Like it's a very bold statement, and I'm not out here trying to be like it's right or wrong. But I'm just like you. Where does this come from? Like, what is that? Where is that? And where is it not? And what sparked it is the sentence. It might not be verbatim, but what you said is, I don't know what's going to create safety for everyone. Mm-hmm. Right. And then you also made the distinction, which I appreciate. If it's racialized, yeah, but we have many identities and race is just one of them. Mm-hmm. So someone could be a white person or a white passing person, but have a host of traumas that contribute to their identities, which might make certain spaces feel safe or unsafe. It's so complex.
It is. And I also think dominance it doesn't guarantee safety for the person who's dominating, right? That's not for me, that's not at the heart of dominance. And so there's an assumption that if you're the oppressor, that you're guaranteed safety. And I don't know if that's true. Mm. Like, I don't know. Cause I don't think I don't know if that's true.
Yeah. And thank you for just saying it that way. Cause I'm with you. Like, I don't know either. And I'm willing to be like, question it, you know? The oppressor is not guaranteed safety either. Yeah, you know, it's interesting because I'm not a person who likes to or wants to believe in the impossibility of anything. And I do like to be positive, and I don't think that asking these questions is negative.
I don't think so either. That's why, yeah, I mean, both of us, it seems like, are in a place of just sitting with the question or curiosity around it, and not judging it. And it's why I said I think I understand where the idea that whiteness guarantees safety comes from, because it has for so long for so many people. And people embody other identities, right? And so it's nuanced.
Yeah, it's nuanced.
In a culture that says it's this way or that way, right or wrong, we can't hold multiple things. So it makes me wonder if it's tied to that. And yet I've been in so many spaces, so many anti-racism trainings, where white people have said, I don't feel safe. And it's been from resistance, and it's been from a place of like, I need to shut this down because I'm uncomfortable.
Right.
So it makes me wonder if, how spaces can acknowledge that whiteness has created safety for white people.
Yeah.
The construction of whiteness has created safety for white people and has harmed people of color. Like, can we just assume that in spaces, if we're focusing on race or other identities, like who's being marginalized and who's being uplifted? Can we just name that, and we want to try to create a safer space? And we also need a repair model for when we cause harm.
Repair. Yeah. And what I'm also hearing and kind of extracting from what you were just saying is that safety does not equal comfort.
Right. And whiteness, whiteness says safety equals comfort. And so when you feel uncomfortable, a person of color is probably creating that discomfort for you, and that you need to shut it down. I'm not saying you, I'm talking about whiteness.
Totally.
That's what it does.
Yeah. And that's interesting. Like, comfort, I think comfort's so overrated.
Yeah. And I think and I've said this in workshops and readings, like, I walk around feeling uncomfortable most of the time.
Yeah.
Because the culture, everyone can see I'm Black, and it's not safe to be Black in this country right now. And I don't think it ever has been, but It's like,
yeah,
I can go on social media and see all the ways that's not safe for me to be.
Totally.
Right now. So yeah, I think people forget that some of us are walking around feeling discomfort all the time based on just who we are and our very being.
Yeah, just walking out the door. That is one of my great privileges that I always I just acknowledge and am grateful for, is the ethnic ambiguity. Because even when I travel, there's a lot of places I go that people kind of just assume I'm from there or I'm like them, which I think, if I think in a more spiritual or esoteric context, because I'm meant to be in the world doing what I do, it actually kind of gives me a little cloak of safety here and there to be out in the world and be spreading my voice and doing my truth telling my way. But I know it's super important to acknowledge that that's a real gift, not something that people are experiencing.
Yeah, absolutely.
What have I not asked you yet, either about the book or about your experience or anything that's going on for you in your work and your world right now that you want to talk about?
It actually goes back to the way we started when you asked about the truth that
the big truth
is most present right now. So it was 2017. I created the deck, which you've seen on Instagram probably. It's called Transverse. And I created a deck to help people, a divination deck, to help people process grief. And I had the idea to create it. Then I moved to Portland. Then my father passed away. Then I created it. Then my grandmother passed away.
Oh my goodness.
So, yeah, it was a lot of loss all at one time and in a new space. And it sort of led me to, I created a mantra deck from it that came out in December. And I want to lead a workshop that's focused on collective grief in response to white supremacy and oppression. And I want it to be for people of color and white people and multiracial people. And I've invited 6 facilitators, 3 people of color, 3 white people, to facilitate with me. I'm still dreaming it up, so I don't have any details about it yet other than it's going to happen. and will include lots of different rituals, including like water and fire and earth. It'll be at the ocean. I know that. Because I think, and I've said this before, that dominant culture, and we talked about it here, says to forget and to lie and pretend. And that means like we're just stuffing our grief down, right?
Yeah.
And that will kill us, right? Stuffing down this grief and holding it in our bodies that's not sustainable. And so I want to create a space where we process it.
Yeah.
For healing.
I love this. So the event where I met you, something struck me. I don't remember exactly when, but at a certain point in the event, and I think the way I said it was to be in a space where whiteness is a topic of conversation and not what's running the room. I felt tender all weekend. I was grieving that, just like you were saying, this feels so good to be here. In fact, like it's one of the things that motivated me to intentionally go and make sure I spend more time with my family in Puerto Rico, to like be in a place where I could just go be with brown people. Because it was a different, we don't even realize, those of us who are, whether you're mixed, white passing or white, that whiteness oppresses everybody. I'm not creating a hierarchy here. I'm not being like poor us, but like we have a stake in this too.
Right.
It might create more privileges and advantages for people, but it's not good for anybody.
Right. That's right. And I think, and my white colleagues say this all the time, that, you know, white people need to understand that, like, it's harming you too. So you need to have like a stake in this response to it. You need to, my friend Amy says, put skin in the game, which I think is so interesting. She's a white woman, so she says that to white people, like, and race is a construct. So I think it's so fascinating when she says that, but it's true. Like it's not a people of color issue, and we did not create racism, nor did we construct race. It was constructed for us.
Right.
And now all of us are having to navigate this world in which race has been constructed, and identity, so many different identities have been constructed, and harm's happening. So grief is happening, and repair is not happening as much as it needs to be. And that's one of the intentions of the space. Like, we need to grieve or we're not going to heal.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about repair? If anyone listening is like, what does she mean by repair? I mean, commonsensically, we can all assume, but rather than assume, I'd love to hear either your perspective or academic understanding or explanation of that.
Yeah. So one way that repair happens and that I try to cultivate it in a space is to acknowledge the truth of what's going on and what I see. So, you know, those moments in meetings or workshops where everyone's reacting to something someone said or something that happened in the room and no one's saying anything. But you can feel it. Like, I can feel the energetic shift in the room. So I will say what's going on, or I just noticed this. And that's in the spirit of repair. That might not create the actual repair or response to the harm. But if we don't name it in some way or acknowledge, then I don't think we can repair. So, and I don't think, because of politeness and people have been conditioned to avoid conflict, I feel like that happens in so many spaces where everyone knows like something's up, but none of us are going to say anything about it.
100%.
Yeah.
And that's present like in any kind of context or relationship. I had something happen with a family member this weekend that was very intense on Saturday. And on Sunday, this person called me and was just like, hey, like, what's going on? And I was like, hi, I'm not going to pretend that thing that happened yesterday didn't happen. We're going to talk about this right now. It's going to be uncomfortable, but I'm not doing that.
Yeah. And what were you going to say?
No, that's it. It's just like, and then also it's funny, again, synchronistically, at the time we're recording this, I had a thing happen yesterday on Instagram. I decided to share something that happened in my DMs to have a conversation about boundaries. And I was getting so many messages. People were feeling so triggered. And I was just like naming it, like we're so uncomfortable, like you're saying, in the name of politeness or in the name of people pleasing, right? And I'm like, people are going to tell you you're being mean. People are going to like, when you're the truth teller, when you're the person who goes, hey, let's talk about this thing that's happening. And let's do something differently because we can all feel it and it's not okay. But people are like, like, I don't know what to do now.
I know. It's like
then you become, but sometimes being the person who names the thing, you wear the mask of a false oppressor. I think an oppressor that people are kind of making you out to be just because you're saying the thing they don't want to face.
That's right. That's Cassandra. That's so right.
And you're like, that is Cassandra.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So repair is like naming the thing. And then, repair really needs to happen. The person who's been harmed or the people who've been harmed need to be like, yeah, I want to actually work on this with you, or no. Like they need to decide. But so much of the way we've been conditioned is to say I'm sorry and assume that like lets us off the hook. Like, I'm sorry I hurt you and let's move on. When really, when people do that to me, sometimes I'm still stuck in the thing because we really haven't worked through it, or they haven't given me the space I need to work through it, and it's not on my terms. It's on their terms.
Yeah.
So that's key when we think about repair.
And there's action. That has to be action. It can't just be words.
That's right. Like, show me what's going to be different.
Anyone can say, it's really interesting. I had an ex who was really narcissistic, and I remember him telling me that someone taught him to say, I'm sorry I hurt your feelings. And like, he thought that solved it. And I'm like, okay, but how are we going to make sure you don't do this over and over and over again? And so it was funny because that became triggering to me, because when he would say that to me, I'd be like, you're only saying this because you know it's what you're supposed to say. I'm not even sure that you mean it or that you actually care. How you behave moving forward is the only thing that's going to show me whether or not you actually give a shit.
Yeah. Yes. And what you're saying makes me think about the culture and the collective. And sometimes people ask why people of color are angry, right? Or enraged about what's going on. And it's because the harm hasn't been tended to. Like we have not been responded to. There has not been repair. And there is that behavior of people saying, I'm sorry you feel that way, or without actually having any understanding of like centuries of feeling this way and not being tended to.
Yeah. I love that word, tended. And even that, like even getting educated. I feel like in the last year or two, I've seen in the spiritual space, mindfulness yoga spaces, people getting educated. A lot of people making their efforts, which is the tending, which is the action. But then also it's like, okay, and also then do differently. We have to learn, and then we have to apply what we're learning.
And be okay if we make mistakes.
Yeah, that comes up in a lot of these conversations.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I knew I was going to enjoy this so much. Thank you. I appreciate your perspectives, your experience, sharing your story. Obviously, I mean, the show is called Truth Telling, so we're always all about that. But I always love to see how people are out in the world doing their own truth telling. So what does 2019 lineup of events and things and projects look like for you? I know you mentioned the grieving, that experience and the repair that you're working on. What else can we look forward to from you?
I have a ton of skill and action workshops coming up. And so those are, I take the principles from the book and create 3-hour, day-long or weekend-long workshops. And I'll be all over the country in 2019. A lot on the West Coast, but I'll be in like Alabama and Key West and North Carolina, where I am now. So lots of workshops and opportunities for people to meet me. And
how'd you pick your places? Are people inviting you? Are you seeking them out yourself? Both?
Both. Yeah.
I love that.
I did a Kickstarter I self-published. So I did a Kickstarter to support self-publishing. And then that's how we created the first book tour. We just wrote to people on the Kickstarter to say, does anyone want
I love it.
Michelle to come visit? And then it just opened up so many doorways and opportunities, which has been awesome. I'm grateful. I'm very grateful for the support and receptivity to this book and my work. So
yeah. Well, congratulations on all the things. I'm glad I got to experience it. I'm going to keep an eye on your website. I want to come to one of your workshops and just get to see you in person again and read the book. So tell people, we already gave them your Instagram. We'll put all of this in the show notes as well. But where's the website if they want to come check out your workshops?
It is www.michellecjohnson.com.
Michelle, 1 L or 2?
2 L's and an E.
Okay, cool. I mean, and again, we'll put it in the show notes anyway, but if people are just listening and they like are anxious and want to go, they can figure it out. Amazing. Michelle, thank you so much. It was so great. I can't wait to share this with everyone.
Thank you so much. It was good to see you.
Bye.
Bye.
The more I start to, it's like life goes, oh, cool. You're paying attention. Let's show you. And it starts to like all these other weird things happen.
Elizabeth, synchronicity is one of the most extraordinary things in one's life, and it happens all the time. And I want to give you an example. A couple of days ago, my first book went temporarily. It's not temporary anymore. It's gone out of stock because it's being re-released in May with a new book. So I'm on Amazon and I'm texting my husband. I'm being remarried. So for anyone who doesn't know, Eric, my new husband, my husband in this reality. I do have different ways of explaining these things. So I'm telling him, honey, oh, that's so strange. My book is out of stock. The television in that moment in time, this just happened 2 nights ago, says this product is out of stock at the same time. Okay. For everyone who's listening, I have thousands of examples like this. Yeah. This is just the latest. And here's the chances. It wasn't even a common word. This was out of stock. And I look up and I text him back and I say, you're not going to believe what just happened, because you have to validate, you have to share it with someone.
Yeah.
There are so many things. I mean, we can't hear the sounds that are happening right now. Our ears can't get to that. We can't see. So the light is being translated into an image. And for everyone who's listening, if you go into Google the holographic principle, you will see what that is all about.